Buenas tardes, LEC community. My name is Delia. I'm the Director of High Impact Practice here at the Latinx Education Collaborative, where we work to increase the representation of educators, Latinx educators K through 12. Today, I have Eddie Rangel, Executive Director of Adelante Schools out of Indianapolis, Indiana. And before I get started, let's see. Here we are. Go ahead, Eddie. Tell us who you are, where you're from, where your people are from, and how you engage with Adelante Schools.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm always humbled to know that people want to hear where I come from. And I'll hit on that a little bit later. But thank you for having me.
Yes.
So I grew up in a desert town in Southern California called Apple Valley, California. It was a city at the time of about 70,000 people. I'm sure it's grown since, and my siblings who are there can tell me more. But it was, like I said, a little rural community in Southern California, about an hour and a half outside of LA. And I grew up in a very large Mexican-American, very Catholic family in Apple Valley, where we were all in each other's business all the time. I am one of 7 children, and they are my ride or dies, my siblings. We had a lot of fun. And as the oldest boy, I was always the one to be blamed for things. So I got that, chip on my shoulder very early on of, okay, if something's going to happen, your name's going to be on it. I had great family, big family that supported me through everything. And, I can talk about it more, but my life eventually led me to education. I think being part of a big family, I didn't know it, but sometimes I was teaching without calling it teaching, but I was modeling a lot, whether it be for my siblings or for other kids. And I just found a passion for it. It was really something that, I identified early on that I wanted to make an impact, and had an opportunity to work in a really diverse school district in Southern California. And I was teaching music. In 4th grade, I actually picked up a clarinet, and that was like the beginning of a very, very long, beautiful story between music and myself. I fell in love with playing clarinet and wanted to be a music educator. I wanted to teach other folks how to have a lot of fun playing music. And so, like I said, I got a chance to teach in some elementary schools in Southern California. And something that I immediately noticed, there were schools that I was working in that had PTOs, or parent-teacher organizations, that would raise $1.3 million in a year for school funding. And then I worked in schools where kids were being donated instruments, using instruments from like the 1970s from someone's attic, because that was the resource that they had. And that was in a district where those 2 schools were a mile and a half away from each other. And I knew something was wrong. And I started thinking back to my own childhood, where I did not even attend my neighborhood school because my mom and dad said, you need to go somewhere else so that you can get an education that we want you to have. And I got really drawn to educational equity, specifically for our children of color. And so, I tried my hand at being a music performer, which is the thing that actually, I've got a little thing above me, actually. There's California says home. And then there's a little wooden ornament that's Indiana, because that is now home.
I love that. How did you get that? I'm curious.
Yeah. Where did I get it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it as a gift for Christmas. When someone sent it to me and was like, here's a little ornament. And then my sister-in-law actually made this scrapbook. If anyone knows me, I'm very homesick constantly.
Yes.
And so that scrapbook is filled with pictures of family. I've got a picture of my uncle and aunt from Sacramento up there with me. So
Oh,
um,
nice.
yeah. And so I knew, wanted to do music. I came out to Indiana to attend the Jacobs School of Music at Indiana University, and very quickly found out like I don't want to play clarinet for the rest of my life as a job. It's something I love, but I don't want to do it for a job, and I need to get back into teaching. So I go
Mm.
back home to California, find this little program called Teach for America, and it really spoke to my personal mission of creating educational equity by preparing teachers to go and do the work. And they accepted me. They were crazy enough to accept me. And then they said, why don't you move out to Indianapolis and do the work here? And I was like, I can do that.
Mm.
So I moved to Indianapolis in 2012. I taught music for 9 weeks in our Indianapolis public schools. Then I taught first grade and fifth grade. And then this,
Ooh.
kind of, I leveled up into an assistant principal, then a principal, and now in 2019, I co-founded Adelante Schools, which is an education nonprofit that manages a school here on the south side of Indianapolis called Emadonin Elementary and Middle School. And it's been a joyous ride ever since.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. That's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
When you said something about how you wanted to make music fun,
Yeah.
like I instantly gravitated to you. I think um, I could totally relate to that. When I didn't know that I was going to be a teacher, I shared with you before we went live. Like, I started as an ESL tutor because I needed a little part time job while in school, and I was bilingual, and there was a need. I was like, let's do this.
Yeah.
And instantly there was just something magnetic, magical almost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was plucking away at my degree, I said, I want to teach people about my culture.
Mm.
And so that's where I majored in Spanish and started teaching Spanish, high school Spanish for 9 years. So I could totally relate to that. It's like, I want to teach my culture, the traditions, the language, and I want to do the language teaching without all the, I hate to call it like language trauma, but you know what I mean? Like the overcorrection, the overemphasis of grammar, the overemphasis of masculine and feminine. It's like, you know what? I understand what you're saying. Have fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, then
So
I wish you were
yes.
my Spanish teacher, because there was a lot of that when I was
Yes.
Spanish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some more language teachers are really, really strict,
Yeah.
I was strict about a couple things, and it would be mostly like, you gotta sing. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gotta sing this song. Like oh, that's
Oh,
great.
yeah.
And congrats again on that constant, what do you call it? Just elevation of um your leadership journey, which takes me to the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Um so throughout this journey,
Mm-hmm.
have there been, or can you share some struggles that you might have gone through
Mm-hmm.
to get there? Anything that might have gotten in the way? Excuse me. It could be people, places, things.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely. I think the biggest thing I still struggle with to this day, I actually heard Oprah interview the writer and the executive producer of Abbott Elementary. They were talking about imposter syndrome, and both of them were like, "We've never felt imposter syndrome." And I said, "What a joy for both of you, because that is one of the biggest hurdles that I've experienced in my leadership journey. It's always imposter
Mhm.
syndrome." Um, I remember as early as sixth grade band. I was in sixth grade honor band, and I remember when I got into honor band, I don't belong here. Like, these kids have private lessons. I don't have private lessons. They know the names of all the scales, and they know these private teachers, and they throw around these terms that I've never heard of. So I don't belong here. And that continuously has happened throughout my life. This is a very personal side of me, but also like very public. I'm an out gay man as well. And so like inherently the
Yeah.
imposter syndrome was like, I'm not broy enough for the kids on the playground, and I'm not like into Polly Pockets like some of the girls. Some girls
Yeah.
are into Polly Pockets, but like I don't know where I fit.
Yeah.
And so in leadership, it's been a constant battle, and I have to remind myself, like I I literally spoke in front of the Indianapolis Public School Board 2 weeks ago, and right before, it was divine intervention, I'm telling you. Right before I spoke, there was a gentleman who spoke on behalf of his own student, and he was speaking in Spanish. And there was someone who was interpreting alongside him for the school board. And I actually said a little prayer because one of my life heroes is my grandpa Manuel. I remember as a child watching him open the newspaper and read the newspaper aloud in English. And as a kid, I'm like, why is he doing that? I asked my grandma, and she's like, that's how he's learning English. That's how he's learning how to read, and that's how he's practicing. So he's going to do it, and he's not going to be embarrassed about it because he's doing the thing he wants to do. And so I watched this man go up for public comment, and like in my heart, I'm like, you belong here. Your grandfather, your grandmother, they didn't work their tails off so that you could sit here and act like you don't belong in this room of people who are advocating for better education. And I like took a deep breath. I got up and I said what I said. And I was like, okay, that was okay. And so again, it's very recent. It's always recurring. I was in another room today where I was like, I don't know why I'm here, but I guess I'm here. And I've got to just start breaking that down. Because I think it's all very subtle. I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. It's all very subtle ways of people letting you know you don't belong, whether it's language that they use, whether it's money that they throw around. But, I think my constant leadership journey is just like, okay, break that down. Just, it doesn't matter. Just push through it. Because if you're in the room, then you're in the room and your voice needs to be heard.
Yes. I love that. It's like it's kind of like a priming that we go through.
Yeah.
And we don't know if people from like privileged groups actually prime themselves.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes wherever space they enter, they're of privilege, right?
Mhm.
And so I could definitely relate to that. Even in some spaces where with peers, right? With peers, with in a space where, for me, like I've had to present to like admin for
Yeah.
curriculum stuff when I was a curriculum coach, and it was like I would have to prime, just like you said, like, you know what? I know what I'm doing. I'm the expert here. They have no idea about world language standards or curriculum or best practices, right? Like they didn't study for that. And so that priming, then you show up and you're like, da 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 da.
Yeah. Yeah.
So interesting. Um, what keeps you going?
Ooh. It's a really good question. I think everyone, and it's something I think about constantly. I think my family and the values that were instilled in me very early on are things that keep me going. Like whatever your impact will be, you will have an impact, whoever you are and whatever you choose to do with your life.
Mm.
Now, it's the type of impact that you want to have. And I think about legacy, and I think about the shoulders that I stand on, that I have had the opportunity to stand on. I stand on the shoulders of my parents, who stand on the shoulders of their parents, and the rich legacy of our family, and others who have come before me. And I think it is my charge. I've chosen for my impact to be in a very public way, in a very, personal way. I'm running a school. And my constituents, my clientele are literally children, 5-year-olds,
Yes.
13-year-olds. Like, that is a huge responsibility. And I am committed to doing the best possible job I can for someone's people's children. So I think that's what keeps me going. It's like there are days, you know this very well as a former educator, there are days I get home, I'm like, why am I doing this? I could go make so much more money and work remotely. I could
Yes.
zoom in from a beach somewhere.
Right.
But I wouldn't be happy. I,
Mhm.
I wouldn't be able to walk into a classroom every day and see like the impact that a teacher is having on a student, and allowing them to unlock any opportunity that they want because they're receiving an education. And so that's in a very long-winded way what
No,
going.
that was actually perfect. I think, I mean, those of us who are passionate about education and care about the impact, I
Mhm.
think that's a very common, very, very common and heartfelt response. It's the children.
Yeah.
It's their eyes. It's the smiles. I
Mhm.
sometimes cry thinking about it. It's the laughters. It's the
Mhm.
times where, you see folks cross, students cross the stage and get their diploma when their freshman year they were hopeless,
Yeah.
and you had some of that influence in their lives. Whether, I coached volleyball too, and so I know coaching volleyball helped a lot. Like my freshman girls came in a hot mess,
Oh,
legit, like a hot mess. And by senior year, they were in the honor society. They were in, leadership clubs, and going to college to be teachers. Like that, that just makes me so happy.
yeah.
Um, Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
The next question is about I'm not sure how it is in Indianapolis, but
Mhm.
on a national level, Latinx educators are the fastest growing demographic of educators in the nation. Unfortunately, we're also the first ones to leave, and that we're at a 3-year average compared to the national average of 5.
Mhm.
Why do you think this is, and what advice would you give a young Latinx educator out there who's struggling right now?
Mhm. Um, I I've talked about this a lot. I think one of the things I experienced as a Latino educator in a school that there weren't very many. Actually, I can only think of one other Latino educator or Latina educator in that year. Um, it's the feeling of being in a silo or being alone. Um, and identity is very important. The things, who we are and what has shaped us is extremely important. And if you don't find a space that can hold that and a space that honors it and recognizes it, it's just hard to continue. Everyone wants to be seen. Everyone wants to feel heard, be heard. Um, and so environments that don't allow that are very hard to exist. And so I would, as a younger version of myself, tell myself, go and find your people. Go, even if they're not in the same building, go and find them. One of the things that has happened in Indianapolis in the past year because of organizations like LEC, because people like Edgar Palacios, we are now unifying and we're creating our group of our people. Um, that is just very important. And they don't have to be our only groups of people, but it's just a different type of experience to be around folks who know your experience, who know things about how you grew up, and it makes you feel empowered and safe and like you don't have to do it alone. We had a convening about a month ago that was it was transformational because in Indianapolis specifically, there aren't a lot of us educators, Latinx educators at all. But to be in a room, to be like, wait, I thought there weren't this many of us, but there are actually like a good handful of us. It is empowering. It's energizing. We can share stories. We can say little things that other folks might not understand. And then sharing really unique identity things. I remember I heard a lot of folks at the convening, share my own struggle with being someone who is, I don't know how to speak Spanish fluently. I know how to listen to it. I know how to comprehend it because I grew up, when the adults needed to change the topic or needed to speak privately, they switch to Spanish. And I'm like, okay, it's something I need to cue into. So I read the room.
Body language. You're like,
yeah.
oh, she's mad. Yeah.
Or they whisper. So I tell people I only know a lot of the cuss words, like obviously. And I studied in high school, but to be in a room where other people said that and say, I see you. Yes. I was like, oh, okay, I'm with my folks. And I wish I had found it sooner. So I think if there are educators out there who will feel alone, go and find your people because it'll make it a lot more sustainable to do the work.
Absolutely. You also reminded me of something that like when I'm with my people, it feels like we can complete each other's sentences. We don't have to explain all the nuances of our culture or why, why my mother lives with me, why I can't take over in my kitchen when she's home, right? Like, it's like, no, you don't understand. She's telling me how to cut it, how much seasonings to put in it, right? Like, I don't know anything. It's fun. I love it.
I'm sorry to keep on this train, but I just was at Thanksgiving with my sisters. Thankfully, two of my sisters live very close to me now in Indianapolis. So I'm a 10-hour drive from one and a 5-hour drive from the other. So we all met in one place. And to them, there were 15 people in one house for a weekend. And that's a lot. But growing up, after Mass every Sunday, there were 40 of us in one house with maybe 1,100 square feet. And we were just on top of each other. We were eating, we were talking, and we didn't know any different. When I tell people that, like how I spent my Thanksgiving, people are like, oh, 15 people in a house. I'm like, oh, that's right. I have to explain this to you. That's who we are. That's what we do. We get together and we sit literally on bookshelves and things, whatever we need to do just to be together. And you're so right. When you don't have to explain that stuff, it's just so nice.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's like I mentioned, like something magical happens,
Absolutely.
Like it's just, and I also shared with you the privilege that I enter this work with. And that's, I grew up with having, Latinx leadership all around me, even local politicians, like, and so coming to Kansas City, I realized there is a lack of representation. And I wonder, how do we increase that representation when folks are feeling alone in the classroom? They're not being recognized. They're not seen and heard. They're not at the table making decisions, So that's what I loved about the LEC is that they celebrated me and they saw me. Even though my district might have seen me, like they give you the thank you, like, oh, thanks for translating. I don't know what I'd do without you. Oh, you did such a wonderful senior night program. Or, oh, thanks for the multicultural. It's like, it's having that I see you, come sit at the table, that I see you. Hey, y'all, I want to recognize Eddie Rangel for his efforts in organizing, etc. Right? And that is something that when we come together, we do. Now, I'll give you an idea within your capacity. Something that the educators of color that we did at a former high school I worked at, because we kept seeing recognitions being like young white female, young white males every month. What was it? Employee of the month. It was all white female male recognitions.
Mm-hmm.
And so a couple of us got together one day in the hallway. We're like, hey, why don't we just nominate each other every month? Whether we win or not, let's encourage one another. So when you mentioned how the LEC is uniting folks, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to find ways to support one another.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And it was beautiful. Every month for almost like, I don't know, 4 months in a row for the rest of that school year, I was seeing Black brothers and sisters up there, or
Mm-hmm.
my Muslim coworkers, my Latino friends, and we would write funny, silly things and very serious, like, man, the impact this boy has on his football team. Y'all need to go see the work he puts in with these young men, So
Yeah.
doing all of that, I don't know if you want to call it heavy lifting, elevating,
Mm-hmm.
of each other. It has to come from us,
It does.
or at least it needs to start with us, and then they're like, oh yeah, I see you, okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that, because that's true. And Dr. Flo mentioned to me, he's a professor out of the state of Texas. I forget what's the name of the university, but we interviewed him here about a year ago, and he mentioned when he uses the word my people, he says it's not always like, Latinos necessarily only, because there are supporters, there are our cheerleaders,
Mm-hmm.
our support system. They show up in different, races and ethnicities too. And
Absolutely.
so that was that example that I showed you, like where, the educators of color, maybe 12 of us, we got together and we're like, hey, let's just nominate one another.
Yep.
So yes. So as we close out, what if you had one thing you wanted your former students, or your direct reports now in your ED role, to walk away from with your class, or um, your leadership? What would that be? One thing that they have walked away with learning, now knowing about themselves, etc. What would that be?
Mm-hmm. I think it ties to our previous conversation about finding your champions,
Yeah.
your people, and it boils down to the fact that no one is alone. And I want students, staff members, our supporters. You're not alone. There's someone who wants to lift you up. You have to
Mhm.
find those people sometimes, unfortunately, and when you are in your most troubling moments, you can reach out to those folks and they will lift you up, and they will make it possible. Whatever you think is impossible at that point, they will make it possible for you, because they want you to succeed. And I think I've I've had to find those people throughout my life, um, who are going to lift me up in my most challenging moments.
Mm.
And it sustains me, because life is not easy. We all know this very well. Um,
Yeah.
Life will throw you some really difficult things, and you're going to have to turn to those people who support you to get you through them. I actually had in a job interview for a principal job that I eventually, thankfully, got. The person interviewing me said, "I've got one more question for you. Who loves you?" And I was like,
Aw.
what a weird question. But I didn't say that. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
my mom, my dad, like. And he goes, oh, okay, so that's great, because this job is a thankless one sometimes.
Yeah.
And no one's going to know what your life is like. And you've got to turn to people who are going to say, I don't care what's going on in your life. I love
Yeah.
you and I support you. And he goes,
Oh, that's so sweet.
he's like, that's all that matters. So if you've got the
Yes.
people, then good. And I said, I do. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. That is, yes.
Yeah. And
Yep.
it's hard.
Finding your people.
Finding your people. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, any final words to our listeners or our hashtag replayers?
Yeah. No, none other than thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully there were some words of wisdom somewhere in my rambling, just because I know that when people share experience, we find our own experience in those oftentimes, and know that, again, we're not alone. Our experiences are shared, and when we find those groups of people, then we can level up. We can get through those tough times.
Yes. No, absolutely. I definitely learned from you. I connected with you. Things that you shared, I resonated with. So I guarantee you, folks that tune in later or tuned in live are going to feel the same for sure. LEC community, that was Eddie Rangel, Executive Director of Adelante Schools in Indianapolis in Indiana. Thank you all for tuning in. And next week, we will not have an Ask an Educator. We will be live streaming the Latinx Educator Awards ceremony. So tune in on all of our social media channels. Thank you all. Have a good evening. Adios, Eddie. Thank you so much. It was great meeting you.
Yes, thank you. It was nice meeting you as well. Thanks all.